Hello everyone, my name is Jordan, also known as X-3, and today I'm going to be showing you a few different instruments. A few of these instruments I've kind of wanted to show you, mainly because you can use them for a lot of EDM synths. Like it's pretty cool, these chords. They sound a little bit different than what you would expect. Like let me play a few notes of these. But if we raise those higher, a very different type of sound. And so I'm going to be showing you a few different notes and chords, something that can actually bring a lot of life to the track. So I'm going to play this demo example for you guys, and then I'm going to guide you through how I created this process. Alright, so the first synth we're going to take a look at is called these glider notes, and they kind of sound like a little blippy note, kind of like this. So in order to achieve that sound, we're going to throw in a combinator and an instance of Thor. Now later we're actually going to be mapping how we got that filter to kind of bring down some more of the pluckiness. So let's open it up. What I'm going to do first is set this to mono retrig. This allows only one note at a time to be played, and it will trigger the sound once every single time the key or the note has been hit. So what I did is I went through my oscillators first, then the filters, LFOs, and then we'll get into the rest. So for the first oscillator analog that we need, I'm going to take it down 2 octaves. I'm then going to tune this up to 12 cents. Okay, now I'm going to set this to a sine wave and give it some more depth. This will give us the bass. Once we start to, that's more like it. The second oscillator we need to have it is an analog. Now, this analog oscillator isn't going to be played with the filters or anything. This is actually going to modulate the first and third signal. So we're going to take this down 1 octave and leave it at that. Our third and final oscillator we're going to throw on is a multi-oscillator. I'm going to take it to a square and take it to interval mode. The reason why I have interval mode is mainly because it works better for the square that we're using. I'm also going to run it through the third button up here to filter 1, so that way we can hear this synth. Very tuned, but if we switch it to a square, more hollow. That's what we're looking for. So what I did with the second analog oscillator, and actually let's finish up the third and I'll explain what I did with the second. So for the third, I'm going to take my amount up to 36. I'm only going to be using octave spreads with this, so that way we get even harmonics. It's a little bit difficult to explain. So for the second analog oscillator, what I did is I detuned this by -12. So when we modulate frequency shifts with our second analog oscillator to our first, it's going to give us a totally different sound, something that we need to have it as. Okay. That's still pretty cool. I can't get over that. So I'm going to change my frequency by right-clicking, edit automation, and that'll bring up a note lane, but we're not going to mess with that for now. I just want to have that open so that way when we do go into it, I can show you some of the notes. So what I did is I turned on my LFO, key sync, and tempo sync. Made sure keyboard follow was all the way up. And I choose this rising down curve. It's waveform 6. And I changed the rate to 1/8. It makes it a little bit easier. Okay, so for the last couple of steps, I'm going to save the delay and chorus for last. So for our amp envelope and for our filter envelope, one last thing I forgot to mention for our filter up here, our first filter, is that we're going to change the envelope amount to 64. So that way, when we adjust the filter envelope, we're going to get more of a pluck that we need for the beginning of the synth. So for my amp envelope, I'm going to turn up my sustain to full to make sure it doesn't lose volume over time. So it just stays constant. The next thing I'm going to do is for my release, I'm going to turn that up to 350. So that way it has a much nicer release instead of a large click. Okay, that's all we do for the amp envelope, but for now, let's go over to the filter envelope and get started with this clicking. Not clicking, but stabbing motion for the first filter. Turn up your sustain to full, no volume over time. Decay, let's bring that down to somewhere around 250 or 160, and bring down the release as well, somewhere around that same range. 350 should work. That's very nice. Okay, so for the mod bus, I'm going to change my oscillator 2, like we talked about in the beginning. I'm going to change the rate of this. The amount is going to be oscillator 1 frequency modulation. I want to change this amount to be 55. Watch what happens to the sound. It sounds a little bit quirky, a little bit nasty, but we actually need this low synth. So what I'm going to do is, for my second source, I want to choose my LFO 1. I want to choose my filter frequency. Okay, filter 1 frequency, and make sure it's at 100. So when we get this moving, it's going to start swaying back and forth when we start to adjust the frequency. So in order to get those like high pluck notes, what I did is I changed a few different parameters. The first one, when we go over to this part of the mod bus, is that we can actually use 2 different destinations instead of setting up 2 different locations over here. So I'm going to choose my LFO 1 for the first one. This is going to be 83, and it's going to affect the amp gain, how much volume goes into the synth, and it's going to also affect the LFO 1 rate by 45. Actually, I want to show you what that does. So for the LFO 1 rate, down, and turn this down. Okay, now watch what happens. It slowly starts to speed up. So when we play those higher notes, it's going to ring out. The next thing I did is I chose my LFO 1, 37 for the amount, and the destination is going to be our delay dry wet. Okay, so now let's have a little bit more fun with the synth. I want to turn on the chorus to give it some spread, but I want to take down the delay. I want to take that down to about, I don't know, 4 milliseconds, somewhere around there. take the dry wet down to about 24, just a little above a quarter. Take my feedback all the way down, and that should do it. Now for my delay. When we turn this on, make sure to turn it on tempo sync so we don't lose out of rate. It's not going to play out of key. So I want to set this to probably about 2/16. I think that's the time. Yep. And I'm also going to take down my dry wet a little bit. So now watch what happens when we play a note. It has a little bit of an echo, and that's actually what we want to have with this synth. So if I raise this up 3 octaves and start to play a few keys, instant loving Calvin Harris chiptune. When I raise down the frequency, actually let's start to automate that now. I'm going to draw in a lane, and I'm going to draw in a top note from here all the way down here, so that way when we start to play some notes, in fact, let me make about 2 bars at the end, and I'm going to just drop in a C6. That's going to play it for a few notes, and then I'm going to skip it up to 2 semitones. 3, I'm sorry. Alright, so now watch what happens when this filter frequency, make sure it's at 0, or actually 80, or 127 is fine. This just determines what triggers, like if it's playing at default without the filter frequency, it's going to hit at 127. So I want this to be somewhere in the middle. 62 is fine. Watch what happens. We start to get more of a pluck because this filter frequency is being affected by the LFO and also the rate of this LFO. So it's a pretty cool synth. If you want to tidy this up, all you need to do is throw on a pulverizer, turn up the squash somewhere around 17, and take the frequency all the way down to 74 and set it on high pass. So that way it just cuts off the lows. I'll see you in a little bit for the next video. Thanks for joining me, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video.